Dear church, let's talk about outrunning God with my guest, David Lopez. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today. We got a new set. We've got an in-person guest for once, and so that's exciting. My guest is my good friend, David Lopez, who's also on staff at Oldham Lane. He is our university minister, been with us since, I guess, August, maybe? Is that right?
I think September.
Yeah, September. Okay.
Yeah.
So David, his wife Kia, and his twin boys, Cohen and Keegan, are with us at Oldham Lane now. We're excited to have him on staff. I really wanted David to come on to the podcast today to share his story that he, kind of lovingly calls Outrunning God. I asked him, I said, what do you want to title this episode? And he said, well, if I had to come up with a title in 30 seconds on the spot, then that's what I would call it. David has a really interesting, cool story about coming to Christ and getting to the position that he is at now. And I relate to it because I kind of had a similar story in that I didn't grow up in the church, and finding my way into ministry was really the last thing I thought would ever happen. And so I wanted you to come on today and share your transformation story, and hopefully it helps others, and maybe it can spark a conversation with our listeners or viewers. And so I want to start from ground zero. Okay, so let's go way back. I mean, you're growing up. Mm-hmm. You went to church sporadically,
yes,
here and there, and take us from that point. About what, 8 years old, maybe?
I would say about seventh grade.
Okay, so let's start at seventh grade, and let's go from there. So
now, I had always been a religious child. I don't know why, but I've always been a religious child. But when I got to seventh grade, my family, they started being faithful to the church.
Okay.
Come to find out, they had been members of the Church of Christ for a very long time. They just haven't been attending regularly.
Okay.
So I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma,
mm-hmm.
and we get invited by some family members to go to church,
mm-hmm.
and I'm in seventh grade, and about that time, we started attending regularly. And when we started attending, I enjoyed it a lot. Mm-hmm. I had been going to church with either other family members when they would come into town, or I would go to church with friends because I don't know why, I just wanted to go to church. So when we landed at Virgin Street Church of Christ, it is a historically black congregation out on the north side of Tulsa.
Okay.
I enjoyed it. Started doing spiritual things, and by the time I was in eighth grade, I knew I wanted to be a minister. I got baptized when I was in eighth grade, and it's interesting because I was the guy who, the moment I got baptized, I was on my school bus the next day arguing people down about any topic that you can think about.
Right.
I used to just digest articles after articles about the Church of Christ and history and baptism and just all these different topics that we discuss to this day. And so I was that guy. I go into my ninth grade year, and by this time, I've kind of built a name for myself as an athlete.
Okay. So tell people you played football, ran track.
Yeah, those were my two sports.
You kind of jokingly say you weren't real skilled, but you were real fast.
Yeah. I wasn't real skilled at the game, at least at the beginning, but I was very fast. One reason why I wasn't very skilled at the game, if we're talking about football, was because my position changed a lot. In middle school, I was a linebacker. My favorite athlete of all time, Ray Lewis.
Uh-huh.
And I used to watch videos after videos of Ray Lewis, and I'm telling myself, I'm going to be just like Ray Lewis when I grow up. I'm playing middle linebacker at the time, actually, And his work ethic was phenomenal.
Sure.
I've always enjoyed competing, and my father always told me, if you get beat, it better not be because somebody outworked you.
Yeah.
So I found the guy who I wanted to be like. And so by the time I got to high school, my position started changing. You start realizing that you can't be as small as I am playing linebacker. So I started getting moved to safety and cornerback and all these other positions. When it comes to track, I actually had several friends who helped me out. It's interesting because I used to run kind of the longer distance sprint races. So the 200, the 400, I long jumped, I high jumped, I did all these things. By the time I got into high school, my uncle, who was the head track coach at Tulsa East Central, he allowed me to run the 100-meter dash, which is what I've always wanted to run. You know, it's a short race, you get it over with.
Yeah.
I ran
That's
it.
the glamorous
That's
track
the glamorous
race.
one, yes. And lo and behold, even though I was a relatively tall kid, I was able to run very fast in that event, and that just became one of my go-to events, my most famous event, if you will.
So were you still going to church at this time through high school?
Yeah, I was. I was still going to
Still
to
as
church.
passionate as you were in junior high?
I was still as passionate, but as my friends know, I've personality. I'm trying to figure things out, jumping to extremes.
Okay.
That's kind of an issue that I had growing up,
Okay.
which was I'm either all in or I'm not in. Mm-hmm. That's just who I am.
There wasn't an in-between.
No in between. And so my friends often got caught in the middle of that, you know?
Sure.
My first converts they were actually my the girl I was dating at the time, and then my best friend. First two people I ever brought to Christ. And but during this time, I would be the guy who was going to church one week, all up for Jesus and for God and doing right. And then the next week, I couldn't tell a joke without cursing. You know, I couldn't make a comment without saying something provocative.
Right.
You know, and so my friends kind of got caught in that extreme. But that's who I was. But the passion for the Lord, I think, continued. I just was stumbling and fumbling around trying to get it right.
I think like a lot of us at that age, you're trying to straddle the fence, trying to live in two kingdoms. You know, you've got one foot in the world, one foot, you know, heading towards the promised land. You're trying to straddle the fence there, and I think a lot of us have found ourselves in that position. You want to do what's right, but you also want to fit in, or you want to be, you know, something else when you're around your friends. So
I think one of the big issues during this time was that my family began breaking down.
Okay.
The marriage between my mother and my father began going through its struggles, and eventually it would end in a divorce several years later. But during that time, I didn't have the spiritual guidance that I needed. And this is what I mean. I used to fornicate in high school, and it became relatively well known that I was acting out of place. Nobody in the church, nobody in my home, definitely none of my friends ever thought to correct me.
yeah.
In fact, I would just get comments like, you know, just be safe, you know, instead of, hey, son.
It's kind of overlooked.
Overlooked.
Why do
Hey,
you think
son.
that is?
I think I
Just
couldn't
nobody
really tell
wanted
you.
to face it head on.
Nobody wanted to face it head on, and I think it wasn't so much that people were scared as much as people just wasn't spiritually aware.
Sure.
You know, oh, this is just a natural thing that young guys do, that young kids do, et cetera, and nobody stepped in and say, hey, you need to be a man
Right.
and a godly one, and what that means is you need to uphold your responsibilities to Christ, which means you can't be cursing, you can't be fornicating, work hard in school. Don't act like a buffoon. You know, these are things that need to get that should have been taught to me, and it really wasn't.
So you think you kind of started acting, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, out of character a little bit because of the attention you were getting? Because when did you start getting the attention as a Division I athlete?
I would probably say my junior year. My
Okay.
junior year, I started running the 100. I started running the 100-meter dash when I was sophomore year, and I started running a 10.8.
Yeah.
Junior year, I was running a 10.5. Senior year, I had posted a time of 10.1.
Yeah.
And so by the junior and senior year, I started getting a whole bunch of offers from places, not just for track, football. And yeah, I think a lot of that got into my head. I mean, I'm taking silly pictures where I'm opening up my chest on magazines. And, you know, I have a Superman or something like that underneath, and just being silly, you know. And I think all that does get to your head.
Well, it can't help but.
It can't help.
Especially to get all of that attention at like a junior, senior in high school. Of course, you end up winning state in the state of Oklahoma. You win the 100 and you win the 200. So that's got to bring some attention as well.
I think 100, 200. I think we won the 4x1 and the 4x4. There was a year where we went all gold.
Okay.
So
that has to bring you some recognition.
Yeah.
So you're getting offers from a lot of Division I schools. Name some of them.
LSU showed up. Stanford showed up. I remember I was recruited by OU. Actually went into Stoops' office, and he pulled out all his rings and put them on my hand, and just places like that. Arkansas, Miami. I really wanted to go to Miami, but it was so far away.
Yeah.
And Michigan. I mean, just pretty much USC. UT. So a lot of different places reached out to me. Alabama never did, but they also had Dre Kirkpatrick, who was a number one corner at the time.
Right.
I actually played against him when we got to college, and he actually, from my understanding, went first round. And it's interesting because by the time we started competing with each other, I was a starting cornerback for Arkansas.
Right.
And so my name was in the same level of discussion as him and Stephon Gilmore, who I believe also went first round.
Right.
Actually, I think he won the Super Bowl with the Patriots at one point.
Yeah.
Could be wrong about that. Or at least I know he was in the Super Bowl. So
all this attention's coming. You pick the best school of all, Arkansas, right? Where I'm from, where my wife went to school. So you decide to go to Arkansas, and you end up earning a starting position. You come in with a really good recruiting class, because I remember that class. I keep up with Razorback, all things Razorback. So come in and earn a starting job, playing corner. You're playing Tim Tebow. You're playing against Julio Jones, these kind of guys. That had to be a big ego boost. But where are you at spiritually at that point? Have you completely left it behind, or what?
Before we get there, there's a little story I like to tell.
Sure.
We played against Georgia, and it was the first time we had played a smaller school before we played Georgia. But by the time we got to Georgia, I'm kind of feeling myself, and and there was a play where I had to go in. I think the starting corner at the time, he was hurt or something like that, so I had to come in, and I line up against AJ Green. And I'm going to tell you something. When everything first happens and you step on that field and you hear the Woo Pig Sooie, I mean, thousands of people yelling, you can't hear anything. Things just seem to move so fast. It's almost a blur.
Yeah.
And I line up against AJ Green, and I'm scared. All right, I'm nervous. I have no clue what's happening. I don't even know the play. I just know I need to just try to stick to this guy,
Right.
And AJ Green lines up against me.
So for context sake, Matthew Stafford was the quarterback, I believe, at this time at Georgia, or no?
I believe so. I'm not quite
AJ
sure.
Green, Matthew, the Noshawn Marino, that group.
Yeah.
So, I mean, good team.
Good team. Very
Great
good
team. Yeah.
And I line up against AJ Green, and he lines up and he looks at the quarterback, and then he looks at me, then he looks at the quarterback, then he quickly looks back at me, and he kind of steps back, like, who is this guy? So he looks at the quarterback, and he gives kind of like a nod, some kind of symbol to let him know, hey, I think now that I'm older and more aware, more learned, I think he was saying, I'm going to run a go route on this guy, I'm going to score a touchdown. And when that happened, Coach Petrino instantly called the timeout. Let's get this guy off the field. So he pulled me out. I like to brag and say that nobody ever scored a touchdown on me. AJ Green scored, but it was a 3-point conversion.
2-point conversion.
2-point conversion. 2-point conversion, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, but no, during this time, I actually came in as a relatively good kid. That's who I was known as.
Yeah.
I was the good guy because I didn't smoke, I didn't drink. I still acted up with women. I still cursed. I did things like that. But I was semi-spiritual, and that was enough to pass as the good guy,
Yeah.
So I come in, and everything is good. And then over the course of several months, I just slowly fall into a deeper and deeper depression as I fall deeper and deeper into sin. I start smoking. I start drinking. I start partying. I just start living a hardcore athlete life.
Yeah.
And I'm with guys who many of them, they're in gangs. Many of them are 18, 19, 20 with 2, 3 kids.
Yeah.
And so I'm with grown folk.
Yeah.
And they're bringing a lot of their street culture into the locker room, especially on defense.
Sure.
So that's really it.
So you finished your freshman year at Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
You had an injury.
Yes, I had an injury, but I had 2 surgeries.
Okay. And so I know that this is a little bit personal, but if you don't mind sharing what led to you leaving Arkansas. You had a incident there that you got in trouble. Okay. Kind of walk us through that a little bit because it is a part of this story.
What happened was by the end, so when I got injured, it was at a Troy game. And I got ran over so bad during a kickoff. Smooth ran over.
Okay.
Got a foot injury. Had to go get surgery on that. I came into college with a shoulder injury.
Okay.
So since I had that fixed and I would be out 6 months, might as well get this fixed within the same
Right.
month. And during that time, I couldn't do nothing but really sit and reflect upon my life. I'm the kid who wanted to be a preacher. And when I say I wanted to be a preacher, I mean...
So that comes back up now.
Yeah. When I was in high school, I used to email a preacher. Now that I'm older, I know that this preacher is pretty radical.
Yeah.
Pretty extreme.
Right.
But he used to send me boxes and boxes of all his lessons, and I would just play DVD after DVD after DVD saying, I'm going to be like him one day. Mm-hmm. And... what ended up happening is I'm reflecting on, I know in my heart, if I were to meet the Lord at this point in my life, it would not be good for me.
Yeah.
I would not be ushered into heaven's gate. And that had been eating at me over the months. And now I had time to just sit back and relax and say, man, what is my value? Yeah. Does God exist? And start asking some of these bigger questions. During this time, I've also started realizing that pretty much all my friendships were predicated upon me going to the league, going to the Olympics.
Going to the NFL, yeah.
My mother would later tell me years later that her marriage was actually predicated upon me going to the league.
Okay, so you were going to go make it big and make everybody rich.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so I was realizing this. And so during this time, I actually decided that I stopped going to rehab like I should. I stopped eating. I fell into a deep depression. And it wasn't psychological in the sense of it needed, I needed to see a counselor to help me with abuse or something like that, or medicine. It was a spiritual depression.
Yeah.
Where I didn't want to be with anybody. I wanted to be by myself. I mean, it got to the point where I put blankets over the windows so it would be permanently black in my room. I had a young lady in my house, in my room at all times.
Yeah.
I was smoking every day. I was high all the time.
Yeah.
I stopped going to class. I mean, when I say it was bad, I mean my GPA dropped down to like a 1.5.
Wow.
I have failed all my classes but one. I got a C in philosophy. And that's only because the instructor allowed me to turn in a paper at the very end and he was going to pass me. Okay. You know, benefits of being an athlete. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I fell into a deep depression. And I started realizing during that time that I need to get out of this.
Yeah.
You know, I need to get out of this. And so I actually quit Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
During that time that I had quit Arkansas, I had gotten arrested with a friend. And I was actually trying to do better in the sense of I'm going to stop hanging out with all the big name guys, the guys who kind of pulled me into this lifestyle.
Sure.
I'm going to hang out with walk-ons, you know. I'm going to hang out with the walk-ons, you know.
But that didn't go much better.
That didn't go much better because we actually ended up getting arrested because we were smoking in his truck right outside, smoking marijuana right outside of the school and got caught.
Yeah.
And so we got arrested, and it was interesting because when we got arrested, they found out that's kind of when it was figured out that my name was David Lopez, and this big conspiracy started building. Who's David Gordon? Who's David Lopez?
Yeah, because you went by David Gordon,
which was my stepfather's name.
which was your stepfather's name.
my
and
dad,
then,
the one who raised me.
and then it comes out that you're actually David Lopez
Legally, yes.
legally. And so people start thinking, okay, what's he trying to hide? He's got an alias, all this
Yeah.
kind of stuff, which was not the case.
Yeah.
But,
So I ended up, getting out on bail and whatnot, and that was during the time where I was called into a meeting with Petrino, and pretty much it was not a good meeting.
Yeah.
The conversation was more or less, hey, nobody wants you. Look at your grades. You might as well stay here, stay with us. We can kind of sweep this under the rug, et cetera, et cetera. But Petrino didn't know that at the time that I had actually been talking with other colleges.
okay, so you'd already made your exit strategy.
Yeah, I already had my egg. I didn't want to do it, but my family encouraged me to do it.
Sure.
I was already going to be heading to Oklahoma State.
Okay.
So everything he was saying, I was like, yeah, this is,
Yeah.
you can say whatever you want. He was trying to get me to stay. But I decided that I was going to leave. That's when news broke out that, oh, we're kicking David off the team because of his bad habits. And
Right.
it wasn't because of that.
Yeah.
I did have bad habits, but that
Right.
wasn't
That
the
wasn't the reason.
That wasn't the reason why I was kicked off. But that said, I ended up going from Arkansas to Oklahoma State.
Yeah.
Met with Coach Gundy. The atmosphere was 10 times better.
Yeah.
10 times better than the atmosphere that was cultivated under Petrino.
Sure.
The way that I like to put it is under Petrino and the SEC, I mean, it was a dog-eat-dog world. It was almost as if people wanted you to get hurt so that they had an opportunity to try your position. At Oklahoma State, I can tell you the number of times some of the athletes would say, hey, David, why don't you step in for me and get you some practice because you're going to be,
Wow. Okay.
you're going to be
Yeah, you're the future.
the future,
Yeah.
And amazing people did that. And so I went to Oklahoma State, and it's interesting because when I got to Oklahoma State, because of all that depression, spiritual depression, I had dropped down to 145 pounds, 150. I was very small.
Yes.
But it's interesting because when I showed up, I had already had a name that came with me.
Yes.
And then people met me and they're like, wait, you're the guy? But under Coach Glass, 2-a-days, 3-a-days, I was able to build back up my physique and I was getting back in shape. And the spiritual depression actually left because the atmosphere was so much lighter.
You weren't
and
as
better.
stressed and-
Nowhere near as stressed. But I also knew that
Well, do you think some of it had to do with the fact that you're coming in as a freshman with all this kind of pressure you put on yourself, and now you're at Oklahoma State, you got to sit out a year because of transfer rules?
Yep.
You think that had something to do with it? As now some of the burden is released because the atmosphere is better, but also I don't have to fight for playing time because I can't play for 1 year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it was much more relaxed. I mean, even Coach Gundy, man, he was an awesome coach. I mean, I remember during 2-a-days, there was a day where everybody was just having a bad day. And I mean, 45 minutes, an hour in, he huddles everybody up and he says, Are y'all tired? And, as an athlete, you're never going to say yes.
Yeah,
everybody's
right.
like, no, we can keep going, coach. And then he looks around. He says, you know what? That's it for the day. Let's go hit the ice baths. Tomorrow we'll have a little meditation session.
Yep.
And that was the kind of coach he was. So it made things easier. And I remember when I actually met with him, he said, hey, David, you come here. Just promise me you will not smoke.
Yeah.
You will not smoke,
Leave that behind.
Leave that behind. Well, I promised him that, but I didn't keep my promise.
Right.
I showed up and I wasn't smoking for a little bit. Next thing you know, I started smoking. And matter of fact, I started smoking so much that the name that was given to me was Buddha, because I would smoke and then I would just want to philosophize and talk about God and all these theological matters, but I would only do it,
Yeah.
when I was out of my mind.
So now you have a different reputation.
Yes, I have a different reputation at this point. But it was during this time that it's interesting because I didn't start going back down to spiritual depression, but I knew I had a decision to make because I knew that I could get back on that road very quickly.
Yeah.
And so there was a day, I mean, this is just building up. You know, I'm going back into bad habits. When I transferred out of Arkansas, I had a summer of being at home, away from people.
Right.
So I kind of cleaned myself up a little bit.
Yeah.
And then when I went to OSU, the habits slowly started coming back. They didn't hit like they did, you know, a year previous, but they started coming back. And I seen that. And so I had a decision to make. And this was a crucial decision that happened one day, I believe it was in October of that fall semester, my first semester there, where I'm in the locker room. And I'm on scout team. You know, I'm going against first team, and I'm having to be the number one corner or whatever. And I'm in my locker room, and all the scout team there in the locker room just waiting for everybody else. Everybody else is in film.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there padded up, ready to go. The only item I don't have on is my helmet.
Yeah.
And it's right next to me. And I'm sitting here thinking, David, you don't like this life. You hate it.
Yeah.
I hate football at this point. I despise it. It's disgusting to me. It makes me sick. You know that you're still not in the right relationship with God. And if something happened to you, you still won't get to heaven because you don't love God.
Right.
You know, I'm having to reflect and be critical and honest with myself. And I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, David, you got one or two options. You're either going to stop being a crybaby.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to put this helmet on. You're going to go out there, practice, go to the NFL, run track, hopefully go to the Olympics. This is what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Well, OSU didn't have a track team, but it was still part of the vision, you know, if you will, of what I wanted to do.
Sure.
You're going to stop being a crybaby. You're going to go get things done. You're going to make everybody happy.
Sure.
Or you're not going to put that helmet on. You're going to take all this stuff off. You're not going to say a word to anybody. Mm-hmm. And you're going to walk straight to your room, and you're going to figure out how you're going to be a preacher. And I was actually in my cubby crying, trying to figure this stuff out. You know, there's nobody I can speak to.
Yeah.
Nobody I can speak to.
Yeah.
You know, I ask a parental figure, what should I do? They tell me, don't smoke. You can drink, have sex with these women, enjoy life. Just don't smoke and ruin your career. I speak to my friends. Hey, man, we're with you, whatever you do. You know, I have nobody in my corner. You know, there's nobody.
It's pushing you towards ministry.
Yeah, there's nobody in my corner.
Yeah.
And I know the pressure that's on me for my family to stay together, to uphold my family name, to do what I've been trained to do since I was a kid. I mean, there's so much pressure. And I said, you know what? It is what it is. I'm gonna love God. I'm gonna be a preacher. And so I took everything off, and people are like, David, what are you doing? Why are you crying? Where are you going?
Yeah.
I say nothing to anybody. And I just walk all the way back to my dorm. By the time I get to my dorm, I'm getting calls from family members, from friends. Hey, what's going on, man? You know?
Yeah.
I remember one conversation I had with my dad, actually, and he said, David, they're giving you a second chance. You're going to go back in there, apologize, put your stuff on, and go to practice. I said, no, that's not what I'm going to do. Well, what are you going to do? I said, I don't know. I said, you know what? I think I'm going to get rid of all my clothes that I have, all the sports gear. I think I'm going to buy a ticket and go be a preacher in the worst city I can think of, Los Angeles. You know, I'm going to go to Sin City and I'm going to be a preacher. You're going to be a preacher doing what? Who's going to? I said, I don't know. I guess I'm just going to be a street preacher. Live and die on the street. At least I'll know I'll be doing what God wants me to do. Well, he hangs up the phone. He calls back not too long and he says, you know what, David? I'm done. I'm done with you. I'm done with this family. If you want to be a lunatic, if you want to go out on the street and preach and die, that's all on you. But I'm done with this family. Click, hangs up. And I said, you know what? Okay, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I get rid of all my clothes. I don't talk to anybody. People come over. I'm not answering my door. I'm doing nothing. I'm just not talking to anybody.
Right.
Because I don't think anybody's in my corner.
Right.
So I'm talking to nobody. And there's one person I'm talking to, which is actually an ex-girlfriend from high school who let me stay with her during the summertime so I could be on campus at OSU.
Yeah.
I'm talking to her, and she's all for what I want to do. So we put kind of some money together to get a ticket. She's going to drive me out to Arizona, drop me off. I'm going to get a ticket. I'm going to head up to Los Angeles. We go out to Walmart. I buy bags of clothes and stuff that I think I'm going to need with me. And that's what I'm going to do. In about 2 weeks, either a week or 2 weeks before this happens, before we actually do this, I really want to say a week, but I'm going to say 2 weeks just to give myself a little bit more space. I'm researching that preacher that I wanted to be in high school, who I haven't watched in a year, in a very long time. And I heard that he went to a school, a preaching school.
Yeah.
And I looked up that preaching school. Actually, I was looking up him, and I found the website of a guy who hates this guy, this preacher. And that guy mentioned where he went to school at. And so I looked up that school because I said, let me see what this is about. Looked it up, and the school said, hey, you can come study the Bible for 8 hours a day. We'll pay you, et cetera, tuition free. So I said, I can either go be a homeless preacher out in Los Angeles and live and die a street preacher. Like I know that's going to happen if I go there. Or I can take a shot and go to this random preaching school that's affiliated with Churches of Christ and maybe learn something.
Yeah.
And so I sent an email out to the school, and some random preacher, some random guy named B.J. Clark got back to me.
Good guy.
And said, well, you've been accepted.
That's all it took.
That's all it took. And so now I have to, October, November, December, I'll be there in January. So I just had to survive until then.
But everything didn't really go great, because you would think that maybe as disappointing as, my son was an athlete, and it was tough when it ended. And of course, his ended because of injury. But there's a bit of that you'd like to cling to and hold on to, especially as much as you love sports. And your family obviously wanted you to kind of maybe see it through and all that, but not so much because, they were going to miss it and it was part of your childhood and they wanted you to reach your potential and all that, but also because you were going to make everybody a millionaire, and that's really what it boiled down to. And so everything wasn't fine, even though your life had some meaning and purpose and some direction now. You kind of lost your family in the process, right?
Yeah, because not long after that, I remember that Thanksgiving, we went home, and there were 30-some people in our house. We've never had a Thanksgiving this big. A whole bunch of people I didn't know. Matter of fact, my daddy's daddy was there.
Wow,
and
okay.
I had seen him maybe once or twice in my whole life. Matter of fact, there was a running joke, about my dad's dad, because he wasn't around like that in my dad's life. And so family members always joked about, my dad's dad.
Yeah.
But he was there. And I remember I walked into the house, and I haven't been home. I come home for Thanksgiving, and the house kind of everything goes quiet. And my mom walks up to me, and the first thing she says, "Son, are you just burnt out?" And then next thing you know, the conversation instantly becomes, "Well, give him some space. Let him work out. He'll be back into it." And just.
So this was kind of an intervention, maybe.
It felt like an intervention.
Everybody was gathered together to try to talk you out of going to preaching school and staying in football.
Yeah. And what ended up happening was it was interesting because this intervention. So I'm pretty much at this point I'm starting to develop, I think, a part of my spirit that would carry with me.
Yeah.
Which is just a level of fortitude.
Right.
A stone-facedness. Where I'm resolved. I've made my decision, and it's my decision.
Right.
And I know it's what's best for me because I'm the only one thinking what's best for me. And everybody else, they have other motives for why they want me to do what they want me to do. That's outside of what I think is my best interest.
Sure.
So this whole day was just full of intervention. Eventually, people started leaving the house. And I remember there was a time where I'm sitting down, and my dad comes up to me. And he's starting to drink and smoke again, which during my 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th grade year, the most spiritual parts of my life, he wasn't doing these things.
Right.
And matter of fact, I remember vividly when I got baptized in 8th grade, he was crying.
Yeah.
He cried. He was my spiritual giant.
Yeah.
And now I've seen my spiritual giant kind of fall.
Right.
And but he's in the house and he's drinking and he's just doing stuff out of place. And I have family members still around. And I remember my dad came up to me. He said, "You want to go to a preaching school?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "I looked up that preaching school. It's all guys. It's all guys. No women." And I was like, "What's your point?" He said, "Son, are you gay?"
Huh?
And so he started questioning my sexuality. And I looked at my mom, I looked at my grandma, and I'm saying, is anybody going to stand up for me right now? I'm like, no,
Yeah.
I'm not. No, I'm not gay. I want to be a preacher.
Yeah.
And so that discussion started happening. Not long after that, I want to say it's in December. The family's kind of, mind you, my dad and my mom, their marriage is broken down at this point. My dad, he's been doing this since junior year. He's staying at the house of, he's out of the house, put it that way.
Yeah.
And he'll be gone for days at a time. Then he'll show up and he'll want to run the house. And then he'll be gone and he'll show up, want to run the house. Well, December's coming around and I don't have anything else to lose,
Right.
And December's coming around and I remember Dad's been out the house for some time and we go to church and my dad has always been a clean guy. Always been a clean guy. And he was so clean and so nice. And we're at church and the family's together. And I know in my head what's going on at the house.
Right.
And I know there's people at this church who know, but I don't think anybody's addressed this.
Right.
Well, later on, we go home from church, go to the house, and my dad is sitting down, and it's nighttime at this point. And my dad is on the couch. I think he's watching football or something, he's watching the game. And I'm in the kitchen sitting in a chair looking at him. My mom is quiet and it's awkward. My two sisters, younger sisters, they're quiet and it's awkward. Mm-hmm. My dad's just enjoying himself. And I look and I see a golden necklace on him, cross necklace on him. And I sat there and I stared at him for a long time and he looked and he saw me staring. And, he was just like, what you looking at, sort of deal. And I said, I probably shouldn't have said this, but I looked him dead in his face and I said, you need to repent.
Wrong thing to say.
This was the start of my getting life right,
Yeah.
And mind you, my dad isn't a little guy.
Yeah.
6'2", 6'3", 320. He was a linebacker. He's an athlete,
Yeah.
and he's my hero. And now I'm seeing my hero falling.
Fall from grace.
And it's hurt
yeah.
me.
Mm-hmm.
It's hurt me. And at this point, I almost feel like he's an enemy to me.
Yeah.
And he says, he kind of looks at me with a smirk. He says, what did you say? And I said, you need to repent. And so he puts down the remote and he walks up to me and he's standing over me.
Yeah.
And I'm in my seat. And he says, say that again. He kind of leans in. And I said, you need to repent. And needless to say, he took me and pretty much bullied me all the way back to the room I used to stay in. It wasn't my room anymore. I'm sleeping on the couch, just waiting to leave, He
Yeah.
bullies me back to my sister's room, back to where the room that was my room. And who's going to pay for you going to this? You think God is just going to drop money out of the sky for you and all this stuff and all this stuff? And I'm like, look, I don't know. I'm just trying to do what I think God wants me to do.
Yeah.
And he was like, so you believe in God? You got faith in God? You think God's going to? And I said, yeah. He said, how about this? And this is actually the biggest regret in my life. He said, how about you close your eyes right now and pray to God I don't punch you in your mouth? And I didn't do it.
Yeah.
I just stood there and I stared at him. That's the biggest regret I have in my life.
Yeah.
But he said that, and my mom was crying, grabbing at him, stop. My sisters are crying. It's just chaos. And then he kicked me out the house. And it's snowing bad.
Mm-hmm.
Kicked me out the house with my stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I got totes that I have to walk up in the snow to a mall, and I put my stuff down, and I'm just trying to cover myself from the snow.
Right.
And I see a guy walking with a German Shepherd. He walks right on by me, and I'm out there for some time.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting here just kind of cold, and I got my jacket on, and I'm thinking, okay, I guess I'm just staying the night out here, Well, my dad's SUV pulls up, and he picks me up, drives me to the edge of the mall parking lot,
Uh-huh.
and he says, what did he say? We have a discussion about life, if you will, which devolves into a discussion about whether Jesus is going to return or not. And he says, David, do you really think Jesus is coming back? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, David, he ain't come back yet. And I said, well, the Lord ain't slack concerning his promises. He'll be back. And he looks at me and he says, I pity you. And I looked at him and I said, no, Dad, I pity you. And he chuckled and he said, get out my car. Kicked me out again as I had to take my stuff and slosh back through the snow back to where I was. Yeah. And I waited there for some time until my mom came. And my mom was crying and she said, David, get in the car. He's not going to kick you out again. All this stuff. And, there's a lot more to the story than this. But
I was going to say there's more of this even that we don't have time to get into. But so here you are at the Oldham Lane Church of Christ as our university minister. Obviously, things going well in your life, great marriage, 2 wonderful kids, doing a great job with us here at the church. As we kind of wrap up, let me ask you this. For all of those who are out there who are, maybe at a spot that you were at one point, maybe they're struggling, maybe they're going through that spiritual depression, maybe they're really trying to find their way. What would you say? What's the biggest piece of advice you could give to someone that's out there in that situation, maybe trying to straddle the fence like you were at some point? What would you say?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
You could say something that's based upon principle like love the Lord,
Yeah.
But if I'm trying to give practical advice, I would say that you have to make the decision that's best for you in your relationship with God.
Yeah. And don't look back.
Yeah. You have to trust that God is going to handle the circumstance, which he did. He took care of me. You just have to have faith that God is. Sometimes you get a big decision. Big decisions pop up in life that's going to cause probably you to lose everything. It did for me. When I say I lost everything, I lost everything. In fact, there was a time eventually where my mama, we sat down and talked, and she apologized because she said she blamed me for the divorce. I had no dad. I had no mom. I had no family member. I had no friends. I had nothing at one point. Mm-hmm. But I had God. You have your faith. God will handle the rest. If you make a decision based upon what you understand to be biblical, God-centered, God-focused, God will handle the details.
That's a very good point. And you and I have both experienced this in our journey of faith, is that unfortunately it might mean leaving family behind.
Yes.
Jesus' words are very profound in my life and yours too, and that, when he talks about, causing friction within a family, if you don't love him more, then you can't be his disciple. And I certainly, I've lived that, and I know you have as well, to where it's caused division in my family. It has yours, but at the same time, you have to do the right thing. You have to do what you believe that, God is coaching you to do, and also just that relationship is paramount and it takes first place. And just understand that when you do that, when you make that decision, it may not go well with everybody else in your life, Mm-hmm. And I think you have really mended some fences in your family, yes. So that's good. And this story does seem to be going towards a happy ending, so that's
Lord
good.
Lord willing, yeah. I think everything's been going well. I've reconnected with my mother. Mm-hmm. She's one of my best friends. She's my mom.
Yeah. Yeah.
She speaks to my wife all the time, so that's been good. My father and I, we communicate periodically. We're still trying to figure things out.
Sure.
A lot of my friends, some of my friends I've been able to reconnect with, and there's been just, even in that process that follows after getting kicked out, my mom coming to the rescue, and then me going to preacher school, there's still so much that happens.
Yeah.
I've destroyed so many relationships, either because I've made a godly decision or because I've made a
worldly
poor
decision.
decision, you know?
Yeah.
And so I do think that it's heading towards a positive end.
Good. That's good. I want to thank our viewers and listeners for tuning in. I want to let you know that if you have a question for me or David, you can email us, chris.mccurley@rippleoflight.com. Please feel free to share any question or comment that you might have. We'll make sure that David gets a hold of it as well if you have a specific question for him. We thank you so much for tuning in. We ask that you share the news about the podcast, spread the word. We're on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook. Let people know. And thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris.